My name is Olivia Carter, and for years I believed that first love was supposed to last forever. Whenever adults told me that high school relationships rarely survive the real world, I smiled politely and secretly thought they simply hadn't loved the right person. I believed love was enough to overcome distance, time, misunderstandings, and every obstacle life could throw at two people. Looking back now, I realize how innocent the first was. Love is powerful, but sometimes it isn't enough to keep two people together. Sometimes life has its own plans, and no matter how tightly you hold someone's hand, fate slowly finds a way to pull you apart. This is the story of the first boy I ever loved, the dreams we built together, and the heartbreaking goodbye that changed my life forever. I was 17 years old and living in Brooklyn with my parents when Ethan Brooks walked into my history class on the first Monday of September. He had recently moved from Chicago because his father had accepted a new job in New York. I still remember the way he stood in front of the classroom, looking slightly nervous as he introduced himself. Most students barely paid attention before returning to their phones or conversations, but something about him caught my attention immediately. Maybe it was the quiet confidence in his voice or the loneliness hidden behind his smile. Whatever it was, I couldn't stop thinking about him for the rest of the day. During lunch, I noticed him sitting completely alone in the cafeteria while everyone else gathered around their usual groups of friends. I knew exactly how that felt because my family had moved when I was younger, and I still remembered eating lunch alone during my first weeks at a new school. Without thinking too much, I carried my tray over to his table and asked if the seat across from him was free. He smiled with obvious relief and told me to sit down. That simple decision changed both of our lives. Our first conversation lasted only 20 minutes, but it felt strangely natural. We talked about New York, school, music, movies, and how confusing it was to start over in a completely different city. Ethan admitted that he already missed Chicago, while I joked that nobody truly understood New York until they got lost on the subway at least 5 times. He laughed so hard that chocolate milk almost came out of his nose, and from that moment I knew we were going to become friends. Over the next several weeks, friendship slowly turned into something much deeper. We studied together after school, prepared for exams in the library, shared headphones while listening to music during subway rides, and spent hours texting long after we had already said goodnight. Ethan wanted to become an architect because he believed every building told a story about the people who lived inside it. I confess that I secretly dreamed of becoming a writer, although I had never shown anyone the stories hidden inside my bedroom drawer. Instead of laughing, he looked at me with complete sincerity and said, "One day I'm going to buy your first novel, and I'm going to tell everyone I knew the author before she became famous." Nobody had ever believed in my dream the way he did, and those words stayed with me long after the conversation ended. One rainy afternoon, school closed early because of a storm. Neither of us had remembered to bring an umbrella, so instead of waiting for the rain to stop, we ran through the streets until we found a tiny bakery near the subway station. We were completely soaked, laughing like children while the owner handed us 2 cups of hot chocolate. For nearly 2 hours we sat beside the window watching strangers rush through the rain while talking about our families, our fears, and the future we hoped to build someday. It was the first time I felt comfortable telling someone everything without worrying about being judged. Ethan never interrupted me. He simply listened, and somehow that made me feel understood in a way I had never experienced before. As autumn arrived, everyone around us began teasing us about being together. My best friend Sophia insisted that I smiled differently whenever Ethan was nearby, while my mother couldn't stop asking questions every time his name appeared on my phone. I denied having feelings for him because admitting the truth felt terrifying. Deep inside, however, I already knew my heart had made its decision long before my mind had accepted it. A few weeks later, Ethan invited me to watch the sunset on the Brooklyn Bridge. The evening sky was painted with brilliant shades of orange and pink, while the Manhattan skyline reflected across the East River like something from a movie. We stood quietly beside each other, talking about college, dreams, and everything we hoped life would become. Suddenly, without saying a word, Ethan reached for my hand. His fingers gently intertwined with mine, and for a brief moment the entire world seemed to disappear. Cars continued driving behind us, people walked past without noticing us, and the city remained as busy as ever, yet it felt as though time had stopped just for the two of us. My heart raced so quickly that I thought he could probably hear it. That night, as he walked me home, he stopped outside my apartment building and looked at me with nervous eyes. After taking a deep breath, he smiled and quietly said, "Olivia, I think I'm falling in love with you." For a second, I couldn't speak. Every emotion I had been trying to hide suddenly came rushing to the surface. I smiled through tears and whispered, "I think I've already fallen in love with you." The smile on his face was brighter than the city lights behind him. He gently leaned forward and kissed me for the first time, and in that moment I honestly believed I had found the person I would spend the rest of my life with. The months that followed became the happiest chapter of my life. Ethan and I were no longer afraid to admit what everyone around us had already figured out. We officially started dating just a week after that evening on the Brooklyn Bridge, and from that moment on, life seemed brighter in every possible way. We studied together almost every afternoon, spent weekends exploring different neighborhoods of New York, and created countless little traditions that only the two of us understood. Every Saturday morning we would meet at the same coffee shop near Central Park, where I ordered a caramel latte while Ethan insisted on drinking hot chocolate because, according to him, coffee tasted like burnt sadness. I laughed every single time he said it, even though I had heard the joke at least 100 times. As graduation slowly approached, reality began knocking on our door. Until then, we had lived inside a small world that revolved around school, homework, subway rides, and weekend dates. Suddenly everyone was talking about college applications, scholarships, and moving away. The future that had once seemed so exciting now felt frightening because neither of us knew whether it included the other. We promised each other that no matter where life took us, we would fight to stay together. At 17, promises felt unbreakable. We honestly believed that love could solve every problem. One afternoon, several weeks before graduation, we opened our college admission letters together in the school library. My hands were shaking so badly that I could barely tear open the envelope. When I finally read the first line, I couldn't believe my eyes. I had been accepted into Columbia University, the school I had dreamed about for years. Before I could even process the news, Ethan hugged me so tightly that I almost dropped the letter. He kept saying how proud he was of me, but when I looked into his eyes, I noticed something he was trying desperately to hide. "Did you get in?" I asked quietly. He smiled, but it wasn't the same smile I had fallen in love with. "I got accepted too," he replied. "Then why don't you look happy?" After several seconds of silence, he slowly handed me another letter. It was from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. MIT had offered him a full scholarship to study architecture. I stared at the paper, unable to say a single word. It was the opportunity he had worked toward his entire life. I wanted to celebrate with him, but deep inside, I already knew what it meant. Boston and New York weren't on opposite sides of the world, but they were far enough apart to change everything. For the first time since we had met, I was afraid. That summer passed faster than either of us expected. We tried to spend every possible moment together, pretending that September would never arrive. We watched sunsets from the Brooklyn Bridge, took long walks through Central Park, and filled our phones with hundreds of pictures. because we were terrified of forgetting even the smallest memory. On our final evening before Ethan left for Boston, he gave me the same leather notebook he had once encouraged me to write in. This time, he had written another message on the first blank page. No matter how many miles separate us, every story you write will always bring you back to me. I closed the notebook before he could see the tears in my eyes. Long-distance relationships are much harder than people imagine. At first, everything seemed fine. We called each other every night, sent photos throughout the day, and counted down the weeks until our next visit. But college changed us. Our schedules became overwhelming. Assignments turned into all-night study sessions. New friends entered our lives, and free time became something neither of us seemed to have anymore. Slowly, our conversations became shorter. The laughter that once filled every phone call was replaced by silence and exhaustion. One evening, I called Ethan 3 times, but he never answered. Hours later, I opened social media and saw a picture someone had posted from a college party. Ethan was standing beside another girl. They were laughing, and she had her arm around him. My heart dropped instantly. I didn't wait for an explanation. I let my emotions speak before the truth had a chance. I sent him a long message accusing him of forgetting about me, of finding someone else, of breaking every promise we had made. Almost immediately, he called me back. I stared at my phone as it rang. Then I rejected the call. He called again. And again. I ignored every single one. The next morning, I received one final text. Please let me explain. You're misunderstanding everything. Instead of listening. I blocked his number. At the time, I believed I was protecting my heart. In reality, I was breaking it myself. Nearly 2 months passed without a single conversation. Pride became a wall neither of us knew how to climb. I buried myself in classes and writing, pretending I had moved on, but every page I wrote reminded me of Ethan. Every place in New York held a memory of us. I missed him every single day, yet I was too stubborn to admit it. Then one cold November afternoon, Sophia called me in tears. Olivia. Ethan was in a car accident. The words knocked the air out of my lungs. I rushed to Boston without thinking. During the entire train ride, I prayed harder than I had ever prayed before. When I finally arrived at the hospital, Ethan was sitting on the bed with a broken arm, several stitches above his eyebrow and bruises across his face. The moment he saw me, he smiled. You came. I couldn't hold back my tears anymore. I'm so sorry, I whispered before hugging him as carefully as I could. I'm sorry too, he replied. After a long silence, he pulled out his phone and showed me the picture that had destroyed our relationship. It wasn't what I had believed at all. The girl standing beside him was his cousin Emily, who had just transferred to MIT from another state. The photo had been taken during a welcome party organized by their family. I tried to tell you, he said softly. I know. I called until my phone died. I know. I never stopped loving you. Those words shattered every wall I had built around my heart. I never stopped loving you either. For a brief moment, it felt as though everything could still be fixed. But life had one more surprise waiting for us. A few weeks later, Ethan received an opportunity to study abroad in Italy for 2 years through one of the most prestigious architecture exchange programs in the country. It was the kind of opportunity people dream about their entire lives. As much as we loved each other, we both knew asking him to refuse it would be selfish. We spent one final evening together on the Brooklyn Bridge, standing in the exact place where we had first confessed our love. I wish things were different, I whispered. So do I, he answered. But loving someone also means wanting them to chase their dreams. Tears rolled down both of our faces as we held each other one last time. That night, we didn't end our relationship because we had stopped loving each other. We ended it because sometimes love asks you to let go instead of holding on. 5 years passed. Life slowly moved forward. I became a published author, just as Ethan had always believed I would. One afternoon, while signing copies of my newest novel at a bookstore in Manhattan, I looked up and saw a familiar face standing quietly at the end of the line. It was Ethan. He looked older, more confident, but his smile was exactly the same. When he reached my table, he placed a copy of my book in front of me. "I told you I'd buy your first novel." I smiled through tears. "And I told you I'd sign the first copy for you." We talked for almost an hour, catching up on the years we had missed. Ethan had become a successful architect. I had become the writer I always dreamed of being. We were no longer the teenagers who believed love could stop time. Before leaving, he smiled and said, "I'm proud of you, Olivia." "I'm proud of you too." We hugged one last time, not as two people still hoping to be together, but as two people who would always be grateful for having loved each other. As I watched him disappear into the busy streets of New York, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. My first love wasn't meant to become my forever. It was meant to become the reason I believed in love in the first place. Some people enter your life to stay. Others enter your life to change you. Ethan did both. And even though our story didn't end the way I once dreamed it would, I wouldn't change a single chapter. Because without my first love,